Dear friends, we recite the Yizkor service 4 times a year. Yom Kippur, today, and the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Originally, Yizkor was only recited once a year. Today, on Yom Kippur. The holiday is called Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonements, in the plural, not in the singular, the Day of Atonements. And the rabbis teach that the plural reflects that the day brings atonement for both the living and for the dead, which makes it an appropriate time to remember the dead. Now, Yizkor may feel a little bit different on each of the occasions that we recite it. On Shmini Atzeret, at the end of Sukkot, with the emphasis being on the outside, the outdoors, perhaps we will recall times that we spent with our loved one outdoors, perhaps even in our sukkah. When I sit in the sukkah, I reflect back to a child with my parents and grandparents in our sukkah at home. On Pesach, the emphasis on the Seder. We may feel very strongly of the absence of our loved ones from our holiday tables. On Shavuot, when we commemorate the receiving of the Torah, we particularly may reflect on the Torah, the teachings, the instructions, the lessons we have learned from our loved ones who are no longer with us. Yom Kippur is a day that's a dress rehearsal for our death. We don't eat, we don't drink, we do not have marital relations. The dead obviously do none of these things. Many people have the custom to wear a kittel. That's why we're wearing white today. Simple white robes reminiscent of the tachrichim, the simple white shrouds that we're buried in. Our prayers take on special urgency as we plead to God for another year. Another year to live, another year to be with our spouses, our children, our grandchildren, other family members, friends. Another year to accomplish things that are at the moment undone. We become more tuned into our own mortality, and nothing serves us as a sharper reminder than the Onasana Tokef prayer, which you're going to hear in a little while. Asking, Mi yechyeh u'mi yamut, who will live and who will die? Who after a long life, and who before their time? This year, with the coronavirus raging around the world, with nearly 1 million deaths around the globe from this awful pandemic, we are especially reminded of the fragility of life. Who would have thought that the world could be brought to its knees by some microbes? We are reminded of how seemingly random, Mi yechyeh u'mi yamut, who shall live and who shall die may seem. When the mortality rate is much higher for senior citizens than for young adults, it does also kill some young adults, even ones who were previously healthy with no pre-existing conditions. Scientists as yet have no real explanation for why some people get asymptomatic cases and some people get mild cases. Some people are slammed and end up in the hospital struggling for months, and others die. The seeming randomness reinforces what we know, that ultimately, Mi yechyeh u'mi yamut, who will live and who will die, is biyad Hashem, is in the hands of God. And as we reflect on our own mortality, we may find ourselves wondering about the afterlife. What happens after we die? Is this life what it's all about? And when we die, that's it, it's over? Well, Judaism does not offer one universally accepted picture of the nature of Olam Haba, of the world to come. However, we do affirm that we have a soul, and we affirm that the soul survives. And this is beautifully illustrated in a story. The author is unknown. I've shared it with you before, but I'm going to share it with you again today because I think it's very poignant. The first time I heard it was when I was in Memphis from Rabbi Micah Kaplan, Zechet Tzad Livrocha. And he told the following story. Now, obviously, it's not him. He's relating it from what he's heard before. It's about an unknown man who says, "When I was quite young, my father had one of the first telephones in our neighborhood. I remember the well-polished old case fastened to the wall. The shiny receiver hung on the side of the box. I was too little to reach the telephone, but used to listen with fascination when my mother used to talk to it. And then I discovered that somewhere inside that wonderful box lived an amazing person. Her name was Information Please, and there was nothing that she did not know. Information Please could supply anybody's number and the correct time of day. And my first personal experience with this genie in the bottle came one day while my mother was visiting a neighbor. Amusing myself at the tool bench of the basement, I whacked my finger with a hammer. The pain was terrible, but there didn't seem to be any reason for crying because there was no one home to give sympathy. I walked around the house, sucking my throbbing finger, finally arriving at the stairway. The telephone! Quickly, I ran to the footstool in the parlor and dragged it to the landing. Climbing up, I unhooked the receiver in the parlor and held it to my ear. Information, please. I said into the mouthpiece just above my head. A click or two and a small voice spoke in my ear. Information. I hurt my finger, I wailed into the phone. The tears came readily enough now that I had an audience. Isn't your mother home? Came the question. Nobody's home but me, I cried. Are you bleeding? Asked the voice. No, I replied. I hit my finger with a hammer and it hurts. Well, said Information, can you open the icebox? I said I could. And then chip off a little piece of ice, she said, and hold it to your finger. After that, I called Information Please for everything. I asked her for help with my geography, and she told me where Philadelphia was. She helped me with my math. She told me that my pet chipmunk, which I had caught in the park just the day before, would eat fruit and nuts. She knew everything, Information Please. Then there was the time that Petey, our pet canary, died. I called Information Please and told her the sad story. She listened and then said the unusual things grown-ups say to soothe a child, but I was unconsoled. I asked her, why is it that birds should sing so beautifully and bring joy to all families, only to end up as a heap of feathers at the bottom of the cage? She must have sensed my deep concern, for she said quietly, Paul, always remember that there are other worlds to sing in. Another day I was on the telephone. Information, please. She was right there. She said, now that familiar voice. I asked her, how do I spell fix? All this took place in a small town in the Pacific Northwest. When I was 9 years old, we moved across the country to Boston. I miss my friend very much. Information, please, belonged in that old wooden box back home, and I somehow never thought of trying the tall, shiny new phone that sat on the table in the hall. As I grew into my teens, the memories of those childhood conversations never really left me. Often, in moments of doubt and perplexity, I would call the serene sense of security that I had then. I appreciate now how patient and understanding and kind she was to have spent her time on a little boy. A few years later, on my way to college, my plane put down in Seattle. I had about half an hour between planes. I spent about 15 minutes on the phone with my sister who lived there now. Then, without thinking what I was doing, I dialed my hometown operator and I said, information, please. Miraculously, I heard the small, clear voice that I knew so well. Information, came the response. I hadn't planned this, but I heard myself saying, could you please tell me how to spell fix? There was a long pause, and then came the soft-spoken answer, I guess your finger must have healed by now. I laughed. So it's really still you, I said? I wonder if you have any idea how much you meant to me during this time. I wonder, she said, if you knew how much your calls meant to me. I never had any children, and I used to look forward to your calls. I told her how often I had thought of her over the years and asked if I could call her again when I next came back to visit my sister. Please do, she said. Just this time, not information, please. Just ask for Sally. 3 months later, I was back in Seattle. To my horror, a different voice answered information. I asked for Sally. The reply came, are you a friend? Yes, a very old friend, I answered. The response came, I'm sorry to have to tell you this. Sally had been working part-time the last few years because she was sick. She died 5 weeks ago. Before I could hang up, she said, wait a minute. Did you say that your name was Paul? Yes, I responded. Well, Sally left a message for you in case you ever called. She wrote it down. Let me read it to you. The note said, tell him, I still say that there are other worlds to sing in. He'll know what I mean. I thanked her and hung up the phone. I knew what Sally meant. As we sing the familiar holiday melodies, may we be reminded of the loved ones who are no longer here singing with us. It's a time to reflect on the lives of those who are now singing in another world. We can still feel the presence of our loved ones even after they have passed away. It may feel like we could still call them on the phone if only we knew the right area code. But the truth is, you don't need a phone. The special area code you need to dial to reach your loved one is not one that requires pushing buttons or tapping on a phone. It's the code in your heart. Whenever we think of our loved ones, when we reflect on their lives, when we remember their presence, they are there. Their soul is surviving, continuing beyond their life. And I would like to close with a poem from the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai, who writes, the body is the reason for love. Afterwards, it is the fortress that guards it. Afterwards, it is love's prison. But when the body dies, The love goes free from it in great abundance. Life, a broken slot machine, instantly disgorging with thundering ring of all the coins, of all the generations of lack.